The officer pulled him over on an empty road and decided to play judge, sentencing him to humiliation right there on the spot. Everything went by the usual script, until the truth came out in the most unexpected place. Nobody saw what was coming in that courtroom. But let's start from the beginning. It was one of those gloomy Chicago mornings, the kind where the clouds hung low like they were eavesdropping on the city's secrets. Judge Malcolm Baker, a 46-year-old African-American man with a reputation for delivering justice with an iron fist and a warm heart, was driving home. The previous night had been long, grueling deliberations, endless paperwork, but Malcolm was the kind of man who thrived under pressure. His courtroom was a place where fairness ruled, but fairness didn't win him many friends, especially in a system where old prejudices still ran deep. The streets were unusually quiet as he drove through South Chicago. Malcolm wasn't in a hurry, just savoring the rare moment of stillness. Then out of nowhere, red and blue lights lit up his rearview mirror. He sighed, already knowing how this was going to play out. He slowed to a stop and rested his hands on the steering wheel, fingers splayed out like he was surrendering to an unseen enemy. The officer swaggered toward the car. Bradley Holmes, a white man in his early 30s, had a reputation of his own. Short temper, long list of complaints. His smirk could cut glass, and the air around him reeked of authority misused. "License and registration," Bradley barked, leaning so close to the window Malcolm could smell his cheap coffee. Malcolm, calm as ever, handed over his papers. "Here you go, officer." But Bradley didn't even glance at them. "You seem off. Been drinking?" "I just finished a long day at work," Malcolm said, his voice even. "No, I haven't." Bradley's eyes narrowed. "You work late, huh?" "Let me guess. Bartender? Delivery driver?" "Judge," Malcolm corrected, his tone flat but firm. Bradley chuckled like Malcolm had told him the punchline to a bad joke. "Judge, huh? All right, big shot. Step out of the vehicle." Malcolm's patience was granite. Without protest, he opened the door and stepped onto the cold asphalt. The officer's flashlight darted around the car like it was looking for a reason to escalate. After a few minutes of rummaging through glove compartments and under seats, Bradley came up empty-handed. "You know," Bradley said, straightening up, "it's funny how squeaky clean your car is. Makes me wonder what you're hiding." Malcolm raised an eyebrow. "Funny isn't the word I'd use." Bradley's smirk returned. Face down on the hood, now. "What exactly are you accusing me of, officer?" Malcolm asked, his voice unshaken. "Suspicion of illegal substances. You fit the profile," Bradley shot back, already reaching for his cuffs. A small crowd of passers-by had started to gather, some pulling out their phones to record. Malcolm glanced at them, his jaw tightening. He knew the game Bradley was playing, and he knew the stakes. "Face down," Bradley shouted, his tone cracking with the kind of authority people like him wielded carelessly. Malcolm complied, pressing his palms to the car's cool surface. The cuffs snapped onto his wrists with a metallic finality that stung more than the chill in the air. "You're under arrest for resisting cooperation," Bradley declared, the word sharp enough to echo in the deadened street. The phones in the crowd captured everything. The grimace on Malcolm's face, the arrogance in Bradley's stance. But Malcolm stayed silent, his heart a furnace of anger barely held in check. He knew this was far from over. As Bradley shoved him into the back of the squad car, Malcolm looked out at the crowd, his expression unreadable. The storm brewing inside him wasn't one of rage, it was one of justice waiting to erupt. The ride to the station was a slow, heavy crawl. Judge Malcolm Baker sat in the back of the squad car, his wrists cuffed behind him, the cold metal biting into his skin. He kept his head up, his mind whirring like a well-oiled machine. The situation was absurd, but he wasn't about to let his frustration crack his resolve. The station was as bleak as he remembered it from the countless cases he'd presided over. Only this time, he wasn't the one giving orders, he was the one being processed. The fluorescent lights overhead flickered, casting a sickly greenish hue over the linoleum floor. Malcolm was marched in, his tailored suit now rumpled and stained, his shoes scuffed from the rough handling. The once pristine cufflinks on his wrists clinked faintly as if mocking him. "Take him to holding," barked an officer at the desk. No introductions, no acknowledgement. To them, he was just another body in the system. They led him to a communal cell, swinging open the heavy door with a metallic screech. Inside, a handful of other detainees sat sprawled on the benches or leaned against the grimy walls. The room smelled of damp concrete and stale air. Malcolm stepped inside, his presence instantly commanding attention. A few heads turned, eyes narrowing in recognition. He said nothing, choosing to sit down on the bench furthest from the group. But silence didn't last long. "Yo, ain't that the judge? The one from the news?" a wiry man with a buzz cut asked, nudging the guy next to him. Another man, broad-shouldered and tattooed, leaned forward, squinting. "Man, you serious? That's him, Judge Baker. You the one who locked up my cousin last month." Malcolm met their gazes calmly, his tone steady. "That would be me. And if I recall, your cousin pleaded guilty." A low chuckle rippled through the cell. Some of the men nodded, muttering among themselves. Others kept their distance, recognizing that Malcolm wasn't like anyone else they'd seen in here. Meanwhile, in the station's bullpen, Officer Bradley Holmes was sitting at his desk, his feet kicked up as he typed up the charges. He wore the smirk of someone who thought they were untouchable. To him, this was just another day flexing his authority. But outside his little bubble, the world was waking up to the story. Phones rang off the hook at the precinct. First came the lawyers, sharp, quick-talking, and persistent. Then came the reporters, demanding statements and clarification. And then, the social media storm began. Clips of the arrest, recorded by bystanders, were spreading like wildfire. The hashtags, the outrage, the demands for accountability, it all escalated within hours. Back in his office, the station chief stormed into Bradley's workspace, slamming a printout of a news article onto the desk. The headline screamed back at them. "Local judge arrested in shocking display of police misconduct." "Do you have any idea what kind of mess you just made?" the chief barked, his face flushed with fury. Bradley looked up unbothered. "What mess? I arrested a guy who fit the profile. That's standard procedure." "Standard procedure?" The chief's voice rose. "That guy is Judge Malcolm Baker. Do you know what that means? His name carries weight. More weight than you'll ever understand. You just picked a fight you can't win." But Bradley wasn't backing down. "So what? He's not above the law." The chief glared at him, his fists clenched. "No, but you're about to find out that neither are you." Meanwhile, back in the holding cell, Malcolm leaned against the wall, his mind sharp and calculating. He knew his name had already reached the ears of people who mattered. He didn't need to yell or demand answers. He simply needed to wait. Justice, after all, was what he had dedicated his life to. And even in the darkest corners of the system, he believed it would prevail. The next morning, Malcolm Baker was escorted from his holding cell to the courthouse. Shackled and flanked by officers, he walked with quiet dignity, though the weight of the cuffs felt heavier than ever. Outside, a sea of reporters swarmed, cameras flashing relentlessly. Malcolm's tailored suit, now wrinkled and dirtied, seemed to symbolize the indignity of his situation. Yet his expression remained resolute, unyielding. The courtroom was packed to the brim. Colleagues, journalists, and activists filled every seat, the tension thick enough to cut with a knife. At the prosecution's table sat Officer Bradley Holmes, his confidence radiating like an overinflated balloon. Malcolm took his place at the defense table, his movements calm, purposeful. Judge Craig Hart, an old acquaintance of Malcolm's, presided over the case. His sharp gaze swept the room before he began. "Let's get to it. What's the case?" Bradley stood, his posture smug. "The defendant is charged with possession and resisting arrest, Your Honor. The arrest was routine. Escalation was entirely due to his refusal to cooperate." Craig's eyes narrowed slightly, but he nodded for the defense to proceed. Malcolm rose, commanding attention without needing to raise his voice. "Your Honor," he began, his tone steady and deliberate. "I'm Judge Malcolm Baker of Cook County. I have evidence to refute these charges and prove this arrest was not only unlawful, but a gross abuse of power." The crowd stirred, whispers rippling through the room. Malcolm's attorney stepped forward, presenting a file of evidence. Among the documents were time-stamped surveillance videos from the police precinct, showing Officer Holmes handling items that had not been present during the arrest. But the pivotal moment came when Malcolm's defense introduced witness footage from the arrest itself. The courtroom projector flickered to life, showing the scene in vivid detail. Malcolm's calm compliance, Bradley's aggressive demeanor, and, most damning of all, the officer pulling an incriminating item from his own pocket and placing it in Malcolm's car. The air in the room seemed to vanish. Gasps and murmurs erupted as the video ended, and Craig Hart slammed his gavel for silence. Turning to Bradley, his voice was stern and unyielding. "Officer Holmes, do you have an explanation for what we just witnessed?" Bradley's composure shattered. He stammered excuses, his once smug confidence crumbling under the weight of undeniable evidence. The tension broke when Craig declared the charges against Malcolm dismissed and ordered an immediate investigation into Bradley's actions. As officers moved to escort Bradley out of the courtroom, the audience erupted into applause. Activists cheered, journalists jotted notes furiously, and Malcolm stood tall, his quiet dignity restored. The fallout was immediate and widespread. Footage of the courtroom scene joined the viral arrest videos, igniting national outrage. Calls for police reform echoed across the country, with Malcolm becoming a symbol of perseverance and justice. Though his life returned to the courtroom, his influence extended far beyond its walls, proving that truth, when wielded with courage, could dismantle even the most entrenched injustices. How would you have handled it in Malcolm's place? What do you think about his perseverance and calm under pressure? Share your thoughts in the comments. Have you or someone you know ever faced anything similar? Don't forget to like this story if it resonated with you. This story was created to shed light on important issues and inspire change. It's a reminder that we all have the power to make the world a better place. Your voice matters.